On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A, we talk about the common signs of isolation and how isolation is used to abuse you. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and today we are going to talk about isolation, all things isolation as an abuse tactic. It's on the power and control wheel. But before we get to this episode, if you want to be a guest on our Survivor Story episodes, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there is a button that says guest form. When you click on that button, it takes you to our guest form page. There we have all of these instructions. So please do read all of the instructions and either send us an email to narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. And we can never have enough people submitting stories, so please do so. And today we are going to talk about isolation. And we like to do drill downs on subjects. We're going to try to get to all of them eventually. It takes a little bit of time to put together these episodes. So when it comes to isolation, in the terms of domestic abuse, isolation means that the victim is actively being separated physically, socially, and emotionally from the people in their life by the means of persuasion, aka manipulation, threat, or physical violence. Isolation is a significant factor in domestic abuse because it limits our interactions with family, friends, co-workers, and these are necessary interactions for our emotional and psychological well-being, but also for our safety. Domestic abuse is rooted in control, and the more alone a victim is, the more control an abuser has. And isolation really cements the absolute control that the abuser has, because it creates this blind spot, let's say, for victims regarding what options they have to seek help and leave, because isolation gives a lot of power to the abuser by making them the only source of human interaction. So I want to talk now about isolation in abusive relationships and the really big points about isolation and the role it actually plays in abuse. And the first thing about isolation is that it creates dependency. And dependency is a really big thing. And when it comes to abusive relationships, since they are all about control, the abuser wants to be able to erode your identity and take away your independence. So the abusive person will work to isolate you from others to gain a greater sense of control. And this control doesn't have to be isolation in the physical isolation. It doesn't always have to be that way. It can be creating emotional distance or a lack of trust so that these relationships that you have lose their depth and can become really superficial. And it's a form of isolation where you are losing your connections, where you feel like you might have been able to open up or confide into other people. But because isolation is about creating dependency on your abuser, and your abuser wants you to be very dependent on them in all ways, it creates a form of they're creating a form of isolation so that you can depend on them, and not just monetarily or for doing things around the home, but a lot of it has to do with your worth being put into their hands. So they want the dependency of your worth in their hands. And they also want to be able to sow the seeds of doubt and have your ear to move you away from other people, that they are the be all and end all of the world. So they're creating this isolation so you depend on them and slowly move away from other people. And they have a bunch of different tactics, and eventually we'll be getting into a lot of these tactics. So they're creating isolation. The abuser is creating a dynamic where you become dependent on your relationship with them as you experience a much bigger distance between all of your other relationships. And therefore, it's a way easier for the abuser to exert control in all avenues once that happens, because they've cut off, for the most part, where you'd go, and they make them the center of your world. So another big point about isolation and the role it plays in abuse is isolation through manipulation. And when it comes to manipulation, one of the interesting things in this aspect of things is that you, as the victim of this manipulation, has to believe that the abuser is telling the truth, and that the person who is controlling you is the one who is actually telling you the truth. And we talk about this on the show a lot when it is in the idealization, love bombing, trust building stage, or maybe there's a grooming aspect as well, is that a trust in this time is being built. And everything is overwhelming for the most cases. Sometimes you're in these relationships for, they go quickly, but you put your worth in their hands, or they're doing everything like that is so over the top that their love is just so grand, and their future and all of these things together, that you don't have any reason to believe that they won't be truthful, that they have something insidious going on to try and isolate you from other people. So a lot of the work here, when it comes to this manipulation aspect of isolation, is really done in the early stages, so you are see them as a trustworthy person who tells the truth. And when it comes to this type of manipulation, obviously this isn't done with force or anything like physical or anything like that. With this type of manipulation, it is a little bit more subtle. Guilt might be brought in here. A little bit of pressure tactics might be brought in as well. You might start hearing things like, you're selfish for spending time with your friends, and I love you. Why would you want to spend time with your friends? And they've already shown you that they love you, and I quote unquote use the air quotes of love right there. But they've done such a good job early on that when they do say something like that, you have to maybe at this point, being the victim of this, say, hey, well, why do they have a reason to lie to me? They really love me a lot. So they will believe, the victim will believe what is being said and not see it as control. And that might also instill, when they say something like that, that might have guilt might start running through you, and you start thinking these things and be like, yeah, do you know what? My partner does love me. I'm going to go and hang out with him instead of my friends. Or in these situations, they may use the us against them mentality, us against the world. And with that, what they're doing is that they're creating a sense that no one understands you like they do. And they might be instilling that others might not see the love that you two have together. We have a love no one else can understand, to make you feel special and dependent on them in that way. But at the same time, kind of giving you this negative view of how the outside world is looking at you, and that the outside world and your friends and family can't be trusted. Sometimes they might guilt you into thinking that you're not committed into this type of relationship because you're hanging out with others too much. So they might really go after your commitment. And that's a challenge for a lot of people. It puts guilt on you, but at the same time, it's these little subtle things. Why would you not take that as the truth? So it's really kind of harking back on laying the foundation or the groundwork early on of creating this trust that you're going to believe that they are telling the truth when these little tiny manipulations start to come into play to isolate you. Things that you might hear is that your friends and family don't accept them, or they might have been unfriendly toward them at some point. They might kind of pressure you on, like, where's your loyalty, things along those lines. So they're really kind of sowing these little tiny manipulation doubt seeds early on. And you're trusting their word because they laid that foundation and that groundwork, and it's isolating you. And the most interesting thing about this is when they're saying these things to you, they're not forcing you in a way. It's a manipulation. It's done in a way where they can then say, well, you made the choice in these situations. So there's a kernel of truth might come into play. So if you're being isolated or distanced, and you bring that up, hey, I feel like I might be distancing myself, they might say, well, you made that choice. But the reality is you've been coerced into making that choice, and you've been manipulated into making that choice. And the role of these manipulations right here, these subtle ones, specifically at the beginning, are really separating you from your friends and family, but also creating an attitude in the sense of a negative view on other people, and a positive view on your relationship. There could be a lot of mixed messages going on within this time as well, because they might have convinced you as well that you're the one that chose to isolate yourself. So that might happen, but really, like, its role in the abuse here is creating this wedge that's going on in this aspect of things that will eventually make it much more difficult to leave later on. And these messages that are being created and instilled in you really separate you from other people. So another thing on our list with abuse and isolation and its role is that its role is being a tool for punishment. And because of the isolation, someone will become dependent on the abusive person for their social needs to be met. So when you are cut off from everyone due to isolation, it becomes that much more difficult to have your social needs met. And it really then falls on to the abusive person and the abusive person alone. And once that happens, it's much easier for an abuser to start withdrawing all of your emotional needs as a form of punishment to control you. So when you are dependent on your abuser, for this emotional connection. They're able to give you emotional connection, take it away, give it, take it away. So if they're trying to control you or start to mold your behaviors in the way that you want, they'll start to condition you to act in a certain way by giving you this emotional connection that you need, and then taking it away if you don't do what they want. So this type of isolation, this form of punishment is going on. This withholding that is going on, giving you emotional affection and your emotional needs being met and then taking it away. This is a form of emotional abuse amongst all the different other forms of emotional abuse. But in this one is a pretty insidious one, because they know exactly what they're doing, giving and taking away. It's a drug and a drug dealer. It's like they've given you the addiction, and now they're taking away and you're getting withdrawals, and it's really being able to form this addiction and more of this addiction onto them to get away with eventually whatever they want to get away with. And eventually they'll be able to get away with a lot more than this emotional needs being pushed and pulled away. Eventually, a lot more as far as abuse, psychological abuse, possibly physical abuse, can happen when you're isolated. And this is how isolation can be used as a tool for punishment, because you have nowhere else to go when this connection is all on them. And another role that isolation plays in abuse is its help to erase your identity. It's a self-erosion that is going on. And this has to do with your friendships and your family outside of the abusive relationship. Having healthy relationships outside of this relationship with your friends and family helps you have your independent identity. You will get possibly boosts of self-esteem or self-worth from your outside relationships, from activities as well. But when you're isolated and you're being controlled, all of a sudden you start losing your sense of self because of this relationship. You don't have these people to talk to reinforce what might be going on within the relationship. You have no one to bounce these things off of. You can't confide in anyone, because all of a sudden you are being isolated, and it becomes that much more difficult, especially if they've done a really good job with the manipulation aspect of things, for you to really start confiding in people. And there might be shame and everything like that involved. So you're not getting a perspective from anyone about what is acceptable and non-acceptable behavior. So you might be getting put down, nitpicked, comments about your weight, your looks, your competency. A lot of these things, you're gaslit in many different ways, things that are really attacking who you are, what you like, all these things that make up you. And really the only person that you're talking to about this behavior is the abuser themselves. And since they created a form of dependency on them, you're listening to their reality of the situation. And that manipulation and gaslighting is what's going to keep you in these relationships and start to maybe eventually then question your own sanity, your own self-worth, your own identity of what is actually going on here, because the reality of what they're telling you and what's really going on does not match. and you're believing their version when that's not the reality of the situation. And that's going to start to slowly really wear you down of who you are. And they really have, to get to this point of eroding your self-identity, your self-esteem, your self-worth, everything about you. They really did a good job in the early stage of isolating you, manipulating you, and creating dependency on them to get to this point. And another point with isolation is, we've mentioned it a bunch of times already, is isolation creates a lack of support. So even when you know what is going on, abuse is happening, you can see it. You're so far removed from any support at this point. You don't know how to reach out. You don't think you can. Again, shame might really become a big thing. Embarrassment that you might be in this situation where there is no shame or embarrassment. This can happen to anyone. And it's a really hard thing is to leave, especially when you feel like you have no support whatsoever. You have nowhere to go, and you don't think you can ask anyone where to go. And this is where shelters and those things really come into play, especially if they've gotten to the point of isolation where you don't think anyone else is going to understand what you've been through. That's why online communities like our community is important, to talk to other survivors that you can do in your home and reach out to people that do understand you. They might not be your friends, they might not be your family, but they're people that do, and it's something you can actually do from your home, even if you're physically cut off from the outside world. Those are really big things when it comes to getting to this point and trying to leave when you feel like you have no support in the outside world. There is the online world, and there are shelters and agencies as well that can help, because being isolated isn't a simple thing. It's a really complex issue. A lot has gone into getting you isolated, and when there's that many layers to unpack, leaving isn't as simple as people say. And even when you get to that point of trying to leave, it's still hard to make that final step, because there's also, besides the dependency, of financial aspects as well that are going on here, and just really getting out of the twilight zone that you've been living in to get back into the reality of the real world and not the abuser's world, to see exactly what has transpired when you're that far deep in this hole. So if you are listening and you are in one of these holes, do reach out to different online communities if possible, and as well shelters and agencies to help you get an advocate and get another third party if possible, if you've gotten this far in your isolation and don't feel comfortable reaching out to friends or family for a myriad of different reasons. So when it comes to isolation, there are some warning signs for you, but we're also going to mention here, besides some warning signs, common things that you might hear from your partner where they're attempting to manipulate you to isolate you. So there might be some overlap from things that we have mentioned or I've mentioned earlier. So bear with me on that. But starting off here, one of the big warning signs is that your partner insists on as much one-on-one time as possible. And in all relationships and in healthy relationships, of course, you want one-on-one time with your partner, but not when it is excluding other relationships in your life. So it's a big warning sign that your partner is trying to isolate you when they request that all of your time be with them. And it may feel like that's romantic and that they love you so much. But what's really going on is that increasing amount of time spent with them is actual control, and they're getting that control by isolating you. Another one on the list here is that your partner doesn't want to really hang out with your family or your friends, and they want to isolate you from those people. So, an abuser will try or actively avoid being part of those relationships. And they just might simply say that they don't want to spend time with your friends or family, or to avoid spending time with your friends and family, they might be rude during an interaction with them, so that then your friends and family don't want to spend time with that person. And a lot of times when this happens, it just reinforces the manipulation that's going on with the abuser about that like an us versus them, your family that might not like me, etc. There's a lot of different ways that they can play with this stuff. Blame shift in a lot of these occasions and really put the stuff on your family and that they don't understand us. A lot of that stuff that we mentioned earlier comes into play here, but them really not wanting to interact with your friends and family is a big red flag when it comes to being isolated. So another thing on our list here is a red flag is that they invent reasons why you should not see your friends and family. And this one could be really subtle. So it might be that you have a plan with your friend or a family member, and they actually don't want you to go. So what they do is they might come up with like a really grand dinner that goes beyond, or a special dinner than you hanging out with your friends or family. They've made this plan once they find out what else is kind of going on, and then you might cancel those plans with your friends or family and go to this dinner. And it's a thing that one time, sure, two times, sure. But if this starts to become a pattern that you see that you have plans with other people and then they start making these other plans, it could be, hey, I invited my own mother to come over for dinner. You should have to cancel your plans because my mom is coming to dinner. If these things really start happening over a long period of time and really become a pattern of behavior, then you're being isolated from your friends and family, and really take this as a sign, a big warning sign that isolation is occurring, even though it doesn't seem like it is, because it might seem like love. It might seem like if you're doing things with their family or something like that, instead their mom or their dad's coming to dinner, it might seem like it's a family thing, but still you're being isolated from your family and you're seeing, or your friends, and you're seeing them less and less and less and less, and they're the ones doing it. And another form of isolation, things that we've mentioned before, just really a heavy dose of jealousy, guilt, a lot of different types of emotional manipulations. So if they're making you feeling guilty for spending time with other people and friends or family, where that is a perfectly normal thing to do, it's a sign of isolation, especially if this continues to go on. If they're jealous of your friends or of your family, and they're using that as a way to control who you're hanging out with, again, this is a form of isolation and a warning sign, a red flag. But again, as we stated in earlier episodes, red flags aren't red flags until they become a pattern. So when you're going through this process of dating someone, if you start to notice that guilt and jealousy become a big way for them to really isolate you from people, isolation is occurring. And again, we've heard this before as far as a big red flag goes, is them constantly checking in on you. So a form of control. It might be done in the form of love. But a lot of the time they're doing these constant check-ins. Checking in is a form of surveillance, and it's a way of isolating you. So you actually might be hanging out with people, but all of a sudden you're not present with who you are with. you're constantly in a conversation with them, this might become really annoying in a certain way. They're just doing these check-ins. It might get annoying to the point where you don't want to go out anymore, and all of a sudden you are being socially isolated. Again, this is a form of control, but it's a way to isolate you. So you might not go out anymore because you just don't want to do these check-ins anymore. And your friends might really be getting annoyed with you, that you're always on your phone and you're doing these check-ins and not being there, which again can cause an issue between you and your friends of not being present, not being there while you're out with them, while you're in their presence, which then might cause some friction and possibly an argument, which then goes all the way back to you don't understand a relationship and all the things that have been implanted in your head as far as our relationship is different, our relationship is special. People don't understand this type of love that we have. And that is it for our red flags as far as isolation goes and common things for you to look out for. So there are also some common phrases or things that an abuser might say to isolate you, and we're just going to run down a few right here. A big one, as mentioned earlier, is it's us versus the world. We are a team. No one gets us. That's a way to isolate you. They make you feel that your love is special, that no one can love you that much, and that separates you from everyone. Another thing they might do is to kind of create tension between you and your friends or family, or they might see that there might be a little of that going around. They might say, well, if they stopped barging in our lives, our life would be more amazing than it already is. And they might they'll do things to just really stick a further wedge in between you. And they might say that your friends and family are getting in the way of your love. They might be saying they're all against us. If we moved away, it would just be us. We would be much happier. We wouldn't have this interference. They're just not happy, or they're against us because we're so happy. Look at how unhappy they are. They see us being this happy. They're just jealous of us and our love. They might start being critical of everyone and start to point out other people's flaws, and that those people might not have your best interest, and that they themselves have your best interest. This is a way that they can also put a wedge in between you and other people too. And another big thing as far as isolation goes is that they tell you that everything in your relationship has to remain a secret, and that relationships are done in that way. It's no one else's business. What happens in relationship stays in relationship, and going outside of that is not being loyal. It might be just untrustworthy of you to do so. They start really attacking the integrity of you if you go outside the relationship to discuss what's going on, and really harking back to everything in a relationship can be a secret, or it's our problems to deal with. That really provides this layer of you not talking to other people, and really challenges you as a human being as far as your loyalty and your integrity goes, as far as considering your relationship possibly gossip or making you feel guilt or shame about talking about it with other people. And another one on our list, and the last thing that we'll actually talk about, is, I guess, the financial abuses of everything, which we haven't really discussed at all. But when it comes to the physical cost of seeing people and the physical connections of seeing people, money might come into play here in a really big way. So even though they might be spending money frivolously in other places, the finances of being like, oh, we can't afford to go visit them. You can't go drive there today because the cost of gas has gone up, and they might only be giving you like a little bit of money because they've isolated you in so many ways that you can't even fill up the tank of gas. So a lot of the times money will come into play as far as not seeing people and isolating you as well. So that is our episode on isolation. And if you are feeling like you're currently being isolated and having a lot of trouble getting out, and you're really, really, really deep in your abusive relationship, and you're having trouble reaching out to your friends and your family because you just feel like you have nowhere to go and people won't understand you, we have an online community of great people. We have Zoom meetings. You don't have to come to the meetings. You can just talk on our boards. We have chats with people. You can get a hold of a domestic violence agency. There are shelters. You can get an advocate. And if you can go to domesticshelters.org, it has all of the phone numbers and websites for all of these organizations wherever you are. If you're really in this spot right now, if you're recognizing that this is what is going on with you, and you heard a lot of what is going on in your life in this episode, it's okay that you don't reach out. You're going to go through your own process, but just know that we're here for you. Our community here is for you. And there are communities within your community, the local shelters and agencies as well, that are there to help you. So if you're going through that, we're sending our big hugs. You're strong for where you are. You're resilient. And unfortunately, this is what is going on, and we're all here for you. The whole community, everyone listening today is here for you, and we're sending our hugs your way. And for the survivors out there who are out and want to give hope and validate the experiences of everyone listening, if you want to be a guest on our Survivor Story episodes, please do go to narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there's a button that says guest form. When you click on that button, it takes you to our guest form page. Please do read all the instructions and send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com, or fill out our guest form and press the submit button and send us your story in the format that we ask for. And again, we have our own support group on our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Press the support group button. It's our very own safe social network. We have Zoom meetings 3 times a week, Wednesday nights, Thursday afternoons, Saturday nights. And we have our forum boards there. And we're going to be revamping everything in January of this year, where it's going to be a lot of different themed months and a lot of different events during the week. We're going to be starting up a book club starting in January as well. No matter where you are in your process, no matter where you are in your healing, if you're still in the relationship, if you're out of the relationships, it doesn't matter. We're going to create a nice environment where everyone can interact with each other, where the senior members will be taking the junior people under the wing a little and helping them out. And that even comes to divorce and custody. We have a lot of people in our groups that are going through that and have been through it and are really great support. So with that being said, that's it for this episode. Stay safe, everyone, and I hope you have a good night.